Hello, all. This is going to be a bit of a full-fledged kind of discussion about history and I think our relationship to it and some ideas I've been thinking about lately as it comes with history. And we've been kind of talking about the Greeks and Aristotle, and we did a couple videos on the politics. And I think while I was looking at things like the pre-Socratics and Plato, I think it's kind of interesting to maybe see history as kind of these, through the lens of this kind of philosophical discussion of bureaucracy in a way, and kind of how, Plato, in a way, kind of with his forms, he's actually kind of forming categories in the same kind of Kantian way. And, obviously the Germans were following up on a lot of Greek philosophy because, the philosophers kind of tend to have like that kind of esoteric want to, go as far back as they possibly can to, make their point. It's kind of part of what it means to do philosophy. And just like with the forms, he's trying to, go beyond himself, beyond his own people in that sort of sense, and try to give this kind of universal form to these ideas or categories even. And I think that's kind of a similarity you can see with what Kant did, and it's kind of interesting to maybe consider that as history kind of unfolds, if you will. Never before have we kind of been able to actually canonize history through technology, or in this case, the internet. And I think that's really important to consider because, so often as I've, been around kind of the esoteric right wing, like Twitter sphere, if you want to call it, for, some time now, you can kind of see how everyone kind of has this different integral perspective on how history was kind of done right by these sets of people, or we kind of try to pin down, who, where the rise and decline kind of was. And that's a pretty interesting way to kind of view history, because I don't think you could ever really do that before, in where we're kind of having these competing narratives of these so-called dead civilizations, or that we're kind of the remnants, or de-evolution, even if you want to take the kind of traditionalist route. But within these kind of narratives, obviously you have a lot of contradiction, considering that eventually they became kind of vogue or niche in that, as time passes, of course, or there's conquering, or whatever descriptor you really want to use for why something is now in vogue in this kind of philosophical way. You ultimately do have to consider that you're kind of looking at it from the perspective of these are all concepts that have met their end, in that this is kind of a post post idea of this kind of end of history, if you will. And we're all trying to kind of pick up at these kind of different pieces of understanding these different people, or approaches to history, quite literally. And from that, we're trying to kind of form these similarities, or trying to actually narrative craft out of that. And I think that in part is kind of you know, I think one of the questions that people are trying to get at is can this kind of be done in this kind of way that Plato and Kant did in the West, by someone else in this kind of hypermodern experience? And I'm not sure. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know, because it kind of seems like that there is that kind of black pill of, well, if everything's kind of just this jumbled mess of different narratives, how are you going to actually be able to provide not just a description, but something to actually, go beyond abstraction into something actually concrete, like a movement or a culture in that kind of Hegelian sense, right? The culture is ultimately like the concrete and kind of the meta, not just these abstract concepts, but actually trying to create something out of it. And of course, aesthetics and all that kind of discussion. But, ultimately, though, it seems that the only thing that's really comes close to that is what a lot of us have nightmares about the most, and that's being a kind of commodity in this global capital structure where, in many ways, I think you can draw parallels to this with implicitly, I think, within religious circles, especially when I was involved in the church as a child. There is this kind of intuitive knowledge that even your average churchgoer has with technology kind of distracting them away from their relationship with the divine. And I think it's something that you can kind of pick up on if you as I did with my Catholic upbringing, talk to a lot of people who consider themselves within the faith. And I think that's why, part of the whole trad conception on Twitter is, and I mean, I'm not trying to denigrate it, right? I mean, I have a whole, concept about province people, and right, there's this kind of romanticism about space in respect to in an agrarian way, kind of fucking off to the countryside, which I think is kind of, obviously it's a American, idea, or a romantic notion at least. And, but I think the only thing that's really kind of keeping the house together is this global finance bureaucracy that we've built over time, and I think there's a lot of flaws with it, obviously, as it comes to positions of power, and when you have a bureaucracy, right, you're just trying to tame the inner workings of the bureaucracy. It's not even no more of a sense of delegating actual responsibility anymore. It's just kind of playing this bureaucratic structure, this bureaucratic form, quite literally. And obviously, followers of Plato and Kant and that kind of, Hegel was a big Aristotelian, right? And I think trying to get away from these propositions and this bureaucratic forms is an interesting way to kind of see history as this dialectic of fighting the bureaucracy and trying to get in between the cracks and having a creative way to break through. But obviously, in order to do that, you have to have such a level of competence, right? Picasso's this great rule breaker, but he's a genius. He probably understands the rules better than anyone. So you have to kind of be this kind of game master. And, you could kind of see maybe, these metaphysicians and their civilizations, or at least the grand ones, as these kind of game masters who gives us these kind of rules or bearings and understandings of, or at least attempts to understand who we are in that kind of sense, and where we stand towards history. And, one of the only ways you can actually probably do that is you have to kind of try to step outside of history itself to be able to bureaucratize it, right? And I think trying to get back to my kind of point about commodities and global capital is, I don't think that we should just give up that this is the only way that we can kind of abridge everything together, because it's kind of, it's just not very appealing. I think anyone who's probably watching my content feels the same way. It's pretty disheartening, actually. And I think kind of this historical approach to things as it comes to the trad life or your progressive liberal who thinks he's on the cusp of this kind of culmination or evolving past liberalism in that kind of sense, or whatever the case may be, that in itself is this kind of commodity. A relationship with history is actually became this kind of commodity of liquidated stories and perspectives that you can latch onto and espouse out your identities with, and buy a couple shirts along the way, of course. And I think one of the takeaways maybe to try to get away from this video is what is the task and process of actually trying to identify with each other beyond this sort of vapid global capitalist way. And this isn't to say that to have some wishful thing, right? This is one of the things I kind of want to make maybe as a defense of some of the ideas I've been sharing on this channel is, I'm trying to kind of form a way for how people can actually live still within not being necessarily a part of the dominant, power structure at hand, because that's the truth, right? That's how we all probably feel watching this. And it's not just saying, and then everyone just watches my videos or subscribes to my Patreon or starts watching these podcasts that I think are really good, and that's how we kind of come together and we end up solving problems. Of course not. I think it's kind of the ultimate pessimistic, but ultimately non sort of just sitting there and just taking the black pill and passively just letting it pass you by, but understanding the role of you're probably not going to win. And maybe even that perspective in a kind of heroism way is necessary. Understanding that these things that you're trying to stand up for, or trying to even live a valued life, right? Like trying to actually have principles that just aren't unwavering every 15 minutes because of whatever latest rationale journalistic take is going on, or discussion even, to even kind of go beyond that and actually want to talk about what you want to talk about without getting caught up in these hyper modern 60-second clips that we just get caught up in every single day, right? Trying to even overcome that is a task all on its own, and kind of differentiates you in that sort of way. And I think being aware of that, but also not driving yourself crazy to the point where you're TED posting and hiding off into some bunker somewhere, that's probably not the best thing for you either. You are a political and social animal in that kind of Aristotelian sense. And so I think, the defense of the lost position, if you will, or, being a dissident, if you will, is part of actually trying to establish what you truly believe is the truth, I think. I think that's really important. And I think that's part of the reason why, I decided to kind of, I've always been pretty vocal and sort of had an activistic streak throughout my life. And I've been fortunate enough to be given a pass by probably people that otherwise wouldn't, simply because of trying to act as cordial and within reason, I guess. There's no reason to just go around and just I really don't like the kind of especially this was especially prevalent in the past, the kind of rhetoric. Oh, I guess that's kind of actually funny to use, since we were talking about Socratic in the beginning of this, and Socrates and Plato. But rhetoric and kind of owning and facts and logic and stuff like that, ultimately that only got us animosity, and just all the more reason why they never cared about principles to begin with, and had no problem using whatever advantage they could, and sitting around and saying, "Oh, well, I guess now they actually think this way," or whatever. It got nowhere, right? It can only get you so far. But if you want to actually try to live a dignified life in this hyper modern time, if you even can, let's not kid ourselves. You got to kind of have a more realistic approach to how important the internet has came over your life. And I think that's kind of why I would differentiate myself with a lot of people who maybe don't take it serious enough to understand that quite literally, I guess, our human identity, I personally think it's a crisis, and I've kind of had my tangents in the past videos about why I think that's very frightening. But this relationship with the internet is in many regards becoming so much more important than the kind of avatars we choose to associate ourselves with, or you kind of see these historical figures on Twitter and on these forums and whatnot, and they actually kind of, in a way, build an identity within that kind of identity, or offer a sort of parody of that. And I think these kind of selections and even perspectives of history, right? I guess we're kind of trying to wrap this up now and get to the point. Trying to build these kind of narratives out of history, out of these different civilizations and the Western and Faustian kind of trying to actually kind of capture the infinite of history itself, right? To even think about the end of history, which has its own history in a kind of way that's kind of really Western and Faustian, and kind of this all-encompassing way that God has appeared to us in theology and myth and whatnot. It's always around you, and now you kind of just have this consumerist global identity structure, and constant surveillance and having technology around you with your mic and your webcam and your smartphone. I think that's also kind of shows the tragedy of it, right? In the kind of way Spengler would have put it. Faust kind of understands, and in that kind of all-encompassing way, he's trying to get to. It's pretty vain, actually. Vain for different reasons, and why did he even want to do this to begin with? I think that's actually kind of an interesting way to maybe look at the kind of white guilt perceptions towards these kind of historical European descendants and supposed tyrants throughout history, and with the colonizer. They can't even resonate with the idea that there was even this kind of dreamlike consciousness or willpower, if you want to maybe take it from a Schopenhauer kind of way, of actually wanting to explore the world, or see it and try to categorize it or create Platonic forms out of it even. But yeah, this was just going to be kind of a bit of a discussion about history, and what to make of all these different liquidations of history. And this may be, I guess I kept saying I was going to end this video, but I'm kind of wanted to maybe touch up on politics and ideological politics real quick, and kind of point out, in my own ideological history of kind of going on both ends throughout my life, kind of shows how that's kind of liquidated in these kind of historical perspectives of their own. And within even America, there's this kind of right and left wing kind of history now of seeing this kind of almost DC comic book perspective of American history. And I guess even in an NRX kind of fashion, if you will, you kind of see these cathedral actors and playing out this kind of American history of having their own kind of canon of intelligence agencies trying to co-opt each other for power. And so I think when it comes to these kind of ideological camps, it just kind of shows how the internet and hypermodernity liquefies and kind of makes everything sort of that's kind of formless and liquefied fashion of being able to actually go through all these different kind of political awakenings, if you will. I think a lot of people actually do, right? I see people kind of, they go from libertarian to something else, and then there's something else, and think about this maybe 50 to 100 years ago, something like that. If you kind of are betraying unions and kind of their sort of social groups, or maybe even identitarian movements with like black nationalists or something like that. Like if you went around and just betrayed them all the time and claimed their identity, but then like, oh, I went off and totally, did a 180 or 360, like they would probably fucking kill you, right? Or beat the shit out of you, or there would be repercussions for your lack of honor. And I think that kind of shows also in this kind of hyper modern sense, and this kind of commodification of history itself, this almost dehistorical, just like how Heidegger kind of talks about de-worlding. There's almost this kind of dehistorical where we kind of just pick at these different narratives, but they're really vague, and they're kind of put at this perception that they've already culminated in past, but I'm gonna pick at this because I think there's something to be gained from it. And I think that's actually uniquely our sort of problem and placement. And so now I'm officially gonna wrap this video up, and thank everyone for watching this ramble. Please subscribe if you haven't already. But yeah, thanks for watching.